Hey adventurers, so today is going to be my next adventure through Arthurian Lit video, and this is a long one. It's been a while since I've done one of these updates, and part of that is because I wanted to do one, but I was in the middle of a book, and then that book took me a long time to read, and so it just kept pushing the time further and further, and I just kept reading another book, and eventually it's like, alright, I just need to do this, because I'm at a point where I'm not currently reading an Arthuriana book. And so I want to get this filmed, and then we'll continue reading Arthuriana. But this takes us all the way back to March of 2025, so it's been over a year since I've done one of these updates. But since then, I've a handful of books that are directly Arthuriana related, but then several that are adjacent or less adjacent and more, they reference the Arthurian myth in some way. And I'll go through those as I talk about them. The first one is The Way of Idan by Philip Chase. This is the book one in the Idan trilogy. And this one, it really only has references to the Arthurian myth and to the legend and everything because of the way that he's creating and building out this world. He's pulling a lot from things like medieval literature and Arthurian literature and stuff like that to help flesh out this world and help you to basically so that you know what's going on with the world, because you know the references to these other things that he's not directly referencing or alluding to, but in terms of stylistically, there's some similarities with that sort of thing, and thematically to some degree as well. So there's that one. Harry Potter technically also references the Arthur myth, and I mean we talk about the Order of Merlin and stuff like that's a very important piece of that of the wizarding world. And so while Harry Potter does reference the Arthurian myth, and I did go through and reread all the books, I believe I reread them since March of last year. I don't remember for certain, but I believe I reread all of them. Whatever the case though, they're just references and I don't really need to go further into that. First one that is true Arthuriana, that is about the King Arthur legend, is Ghost King by David Gemmell, or David Gemmell. I'm not sure how. I don't know if it's Gemmell or some other pronunciation. But this is one, I believe I buddy read this with Liam from Liam's Lyceum, and yeah, this was a very different take on the Arthurian legend. It actually follows more of Uther than Arthur, but at the same time you're kind of blending and combining the two characters into one. But yeah, it's an interesting take. It's very much less of directly adapting the King Arthur tale and more of Gemmell taking that world and playing in the sandbox of the Arthurian myth, doing his own thing with it, telling his own story with some, basically there's character names, but he's also taking from a whole bunch of other myths and a whole bunch of other legends from Earth and pulling them all together into this sandbox that he's playing with. And it's actually kind of fun. He does a good job at building out this world in a way that is interesting and that's unique to to this story in of itself. So it's definitely a very unique take and a very enjoyable take as well. I thought that Ghost King was very fun. So it's the first book in the Stones of Power duology. Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones. This is the second book in the Howl's Moving Castle series, or the Land of Ingery series. I don't know exactly what it's called. This one, again, we don't really have a whole, it references Arthurian myth a little bit in the fact that Howl's name is Pendragon, last name is Pendragon if I remember correctly, and so there's some references to it, but it's very clearly not Arthuriana in that sense at all, although there are some references to it. That's really all that there is with Castle in the Air. Then another one that's true Arthuriana, and that's Idols of the King by Tennyson. Is that who it was? Alfred Lord Tennyson, if I remember correctly. Idols of the King is very much just a retelling of you could say it's a retelling of the Le Morte d'Arthur story from Malory, and that would be an acceptable way to describe this story. It's a poetic and lyrical retelling. So I wouldn't say that everything has a rhyming scheme to it, but it very much is very lyrical and poetic, idyllic, as the name implies. It's very beautiful. When I started listening to it, I just immediately immersed in the world, and it felt so good. It felt a lot like coming home, because it's a world that I love so much, and the stories that I love so much, and a lot of the stories were the ones that I already know because of things like Le Morte. But it's fantastic. I loved reading the Idols and absolutely would continue reading more Tennyson, but I know that's his major Arthurian work, and so I'm not specifically talking about other works by authors that aren't Arthuriana. And so anyways, but yeah, beautiful, very beautiful. Had a really good time with that and definitely enjoyed it greatly. The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. True Arthuriana once again. This is a 5-book series, 3-book kind of for the Merlin trilogy, and then 5-book for the Arthurian saga, if I remember correctly. So Mary Stewart's The Crystal Cave is the first book in the series, and it tells the story of a young Merlin. It tells of his upcoming and his birth and his life through his childhood into young adulthood and stuff like that, and his rise to power, his rise to fame, to the point where he is known as the character that he is a little bit. Not quite, I mean, he's not quite solidified in that position of the great wizard type character yet, but he's definitely moving in that direction and helping to seed the ground for how this legend is going to develop, and especially Stewart's take on this legend. Very enjoyable. I had a lot of fun with it. The one thing about it that I kind of wish would have been a little bit more detailed or had a little bit more time spent with is the titular Crystal Cave. It's titled The Crystal Cave, and we really don't spend a whole lot of time in the Crystal Cave. I wish we would spend more, but it's still beautiful. I really enjoyed Mary Stewart. I really enjoyed the Crystal Cave, and definitely want to continue and get all the way through that series. The next one I have is one that is technically Arthuriana, but also kind of feels weird to include it in that tradition, and that is That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. This is Arthuriana in the fact that it has Merlin in it. Merlin exists, he wakes up, and is part of the story of this world, in fact a major player of the story that goes on in this book. And because of that, is very much Arthuriana, and I can include it in that tradition even though it feels so separate. I have fairly mixed thoughts on that Hideous Strength, and I like a lot of what Lewis is doing here. I like a lot of what's going on in the story, but at the same time it's kind of weird. It's not my favorite book. It's not my favorite science fiction novel or anything like that, but there's still some cool things about it. I do like what they do with Merlin, actually. I think that's an interesting way to take this story and take the once and future king. In fact, that's kind of the story that's being adapted here in some manner, is this idea of the once and future king Arthur returning and Britain's greatest hour of need type thing. That's kind of what's being played with here, even though it's not specifically that story that we're being told. That's kind of the thematic elements that we're bringing into it, along with Merlin himself. Then I read The Hollow Hills by Mary Stewart. This is book 2 in her Arthurian saga, and pretty much every single thought that I had about book 1 is exactly the same about book 2. Just absolutely incredible series that works so well for me personally. It's exactly my style of storytelling, exactly my style of fantasy. There is a little bit of the grosser side of the Arthurian legend is definitely brought into this book, and I don't necessarily enjoy that, but I do think that at the same time Stewart handled it tact, and it was done well enough that as much as I dislike it, I can appreciate the way that she chose to handle that story. And so yeah, overall though, just fantastic. Really enjoy the series, and definitely am excited to continue through that. That's the last book that I've read so far in the series though, and I need to continue on. Next though, we have Last Sword of Power, which is book 2 in the Stones of Power duology. So the first one I mentioned is Ghost King, and I read that in March. This Last Sword of Power I read in October, and so it was quite a while in between that as well, but that was another one that I read with Liam, and so pretty much all those same thoughts that I had said about Ghost King apply to the Last Sword of Power, where it's very much Gimel playing in the sandbox of the Arthurian legend, and just pulling in whatever he wants to from myth and from legend, and just telling a story that's it's very action oriented. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of things going on, there's a lot of battle and warfare and just things happening very quickly in a short amount of time, and he spans a lot of the story that he's trying to tell in a very short amount of time. This one is a little bit less Arthuriana than the first book. The first book deals with Uther as a character who's also kind of Arthur in the same way, and you deal with Guinevere and Lancelot and stuff like that. There's a lot of that's pulled into that first book. The second book, the character is still there, but it's far less Arthuriana trappings and much more just, this is a fantasy story set supposedly on Earth, but with these characters, and so you're dealing with a lot of things. There's time that has passed and relationships that have changed in the space between the two books. And so there's a lot of difference in that way to it, but it's also just very much the same mode of construction, I suppose, for how Gemmell chooses to build this story and build this world as it is with Ghost King, the first book. Then I read The Prophet of Adan. This is the second book in the in the Way of the Adan trilogy by Philip Chase. I already talked about The Way of Adan and how it's just kind of through the style and the way that Chase is building that story. It weaves in some Arthurian themes and stuff like that, and that's the same thing here with book 2. So I really, what I should have done for this video is group the series up and just talk about the series as a whole, but for some reason I chose not to do that. Anyways, we're going to continue on though, but The Prophet of Adan, just very similar in thoughts to The Way of Adan. I read The Canterbury Tales finally by Geoffrey Chaucer. I actually listened to it even though I have the physical book. This one is primarily not Arthuriana, but there is a at least one tale that directly references King Arthur's court and stuff like that, and that is the Wife of Bath's tale. That's a tale that has a lot of it directly references, you go back to King Arthur's court as the Wife of Bath is telling this tale, and you go back to King Arthur's court and you go on this adventure quest, I guess is probably a better term, this quest with a knight to uncover what's the secret that he's trying to learn, or the information that he's trying to learn. I believe it's what a woman most desires, if I remember correctly. And so you go through this tale and this story, and it's kind of, to be quite honest, this wasn't my favorite story in this book, and it wasn't my favorite Arthurian story that I've ever read. It's kind of nice to have read it and to understand now the references that are made to it, but it definitely wasn't something that I particularly loved reading or really enjoyed the story of. It wasn't something that was terribly interesting or well told in my, not well told, that's not how I should put it, but it wasn't something that was interesting to me. Still, I'm glad that I read it, and I'm glad that I've read Canterbury Tales at this point. Then I read The History of the Kings of Britain. This is one that I actually started, I don't know, October or something like that, and I finished it in January of this year. And so it took a long time for me to get through this book. The ebook that I had of it was, I think it was a Project Gutenberg download, and it was not a very high quality download ebook. And there were times where you would see a picture of the page with somebody's hand covering half the pages and stuff like that, and you really couldn't see read the entirety of the narrative as clearly as I would have preferred. But I do think that I got the gist of the story, and for the most part those were like 3 pages throughout the entirety of the book that had that sort of situation going on, and so it really didn't influence the narrative of the book as a whole. You might have just missed some pieces of certain of the mini stories that are being told within it. But this one is Arthuriana, and this is kind of one of the foundational and extremely influential Arthurian tales, because it kind of established Merlin. It established what King Arthur's court kind of looked like, and how this legend would then filter out and be taken up by other authors. It's kind of interesting though. So it tells this tale of the histories of it tells of the history of the kings of Britain, not just specifically King Arthur. And so we go back to the very, very beginning of these kings of Britain with Brutus, is that his name, who at the beginning of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it says when the siege and assault had ceased at Troy or something like that, and then it talks about how Brutus had left and gone to the British Isles. That's where we're starting, is this Brutus leaving and going to the British Isles and establishing a kingdom there. And then we follow the kings down all the way down through, I don't remember, several generations after Arthur. But we get down there and we have all these historical tales about other kings, and just sometimes very short, very much, this is what that happened, this is the one thing that he's known for, or maybe it was just he was born here and then that's all that we know about him, or whatever, that sort of stuff. Very much it felt a lot like in the Bible, like the books of Chronicles or something like that. Feels very much like that in a lot of ways, where it's just, this is the event that happened, this is the next event that happened, this is the next event that happened, up until you get to Merlin. That's the one where it really builds out. And of course Merlin isn't a king, but you're talking about Vortigern, who was a king, or considered a king by somebody, or type stuff, and so he definitely held a position of power in Britain. And so we're dealing with Vortigern and Merlin at the same time, and so we're getting to see a lot of the origin of these tales in a lot of ways. And what I noticed most about this, besides the fact that I really enjoyed the Merlin and Arthur aspects, besides that, what I noticed is that Mary Stuart took pretty much beat for beat what happens in Histories of the Kings of Britain and Histories of the Kings of Britain in order to tell her Arthurian saga tale. And that was having read the first two books in the Arthurian saga before having finished History of the Kings of Britain. It was interesting for me to go through and recognize the things and say, oh, this is where Stuart is getting these things from, because I believe in my reviews I said something along the lines of, these are tales that are, or like, we're dealing with histories, like potential different histories or theories of the birth of Merlin or something like that, who he is and what type of character he is, and how you have all these potential different origins. And Stuart wove those all into her books. And then I go and read Monmouth, and it's very similar. Monmouth does pretty much exactly the same thing, and then Stuart takes inspiration from that. So it's just interesting to me, and I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to read History of the Kings of Britain so that I can then retroactively apply that knowledge to the rest of the things that I've read. House in Many Ways, this is the third and final book in the Howl's Moving Castle series by Diana Wynne Jones. I talked about the Castle in the Air, which is book 2, and House in Many Ways, again, we have characters who are seemingly related to somehow the Arthurian myth, but that's really it. It's not really terribly Arthurian. Moving on. This next one I'm excited to talk about, and that is Aurelia by Stephen R. Lawhead. This is the Pendragon cycle. This is a book in the Pendragon cycle, kind of a book 6, kind of a book 2.5 to some degree. It takes place chronologically during the events of book 2, which is Merlin, but at the same time it's meant to be read after at the very least after you've read Merlin, so that you can know what's going on with the story and the events that are going on there, and it kind of nestles itself into a lot of the events that take place in Merlin. Aurelia is the tale of the mother of Uther and Aurelius, and so it's a very intimate story rather than the grand epic scale of the other Pendragon cycle books, but it's very good. It's very much aligned with the character-driven nature of especially Taliesin and Merlin, and so it feels right. It fits right into that vein, even though it's a very different type of story in the sense that it's not this grand epic sweeping battle for the fate of Britain. It's not that. That's not the type of story that it is. This is a story of one woman, and it's very well told, very enjoyable. Had a great time going through this one. Yeah, just wonderful book. Very much enjoyed this. Very glad that Lawhead chose to write and publish another book in this world. I've got 2 left. One that's just kind of references again, and that is Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. This is the first book in his Sun Eater saga. I believe it is. I believe it's a saga, not a series. I forget what exactly it's called, but Sun Eater. And this one again, this is not a King Arthur story. However, Rocchio very clearly within the book makes references back to the legend of King Arthur and these different characters and these ideas that were presented at that time. And Rocchio is also weaving some of those themes, much like Chase does with his Edan trilogy. He kind of weaves those things and those themes and those ideas into the story that he's telling with of Hadrian Marlowe. And so there's a little bit of references here. You're definitely getting some Arthurian vibes, I guess, if you want to say it that way. I don't love the word vibes, but whatever, it's what I'm gonna go with for here. But yeah, so you're definitely getting a little bit of that flavor, that Arthurian flavor, through the story and through the way that Rocchio is building this world once again. But it's not really directly, Merlin doesn't exist, for example. You're not dealing with characters from the Arthurian myth. You're not returning to King Arthur's court or anything like that. And then the last one I read is a short story by Robert Zelazny, and this is contained in a collection of Zelazny's. Robert Zelazny? Is that his name? I think so. Anyways, Roger, not Robert. Roger Zelazny. And this is the title of the the title of the collection as well as the title of this specific story is The Last Defender of Camelot. And this is one where it very much, once again, is directly Arthurian related. And that is because it's about Lancelot in a more modern setting. It's not modern anymore, but it's a very interesting take. I really enjoyed the take, to be honest. I thought it was very well thought out look at how this story could continue into the future, and pulling in a lot of the pieces of the myth, but also done in a very different way. And Zelazny has some good ideas that he's playing with in the creation of this story. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about this here because I buddy read this with Liam as well, and we're going to have a discussion on that. So I don't know when that discussion is going to go up. In relation to this video, but I would recommend that instead of listening to my thoughts here, I want to save them and have you go watch that video as well. So if you're interested in hearing more about The Last Defender of Camelot by Roger Zelazny, go watch that video whenever that comes out. If it's before this, I don't think it's before this. No, it won't be before this. It'll be sometime after this. Overall, I enjoyed the story. I definitely have some thoughts about it, and I'm excited to discuss them with Liam. So that is my latest adventure through Arthurian literature video update. That's over a year's worth of Arthurian reading. Obviously, I don't read only King Arthur books, and probably some of the books that I've read reference King Arthur in some way, reference that legend in some way, and I didn't put them on this list. And that's fine. I don't have to do every single thing. These are just the ones that are directly Arthurian related, but then the ones that in some way harken back to it pretty clearly. That's really all that I have to talk about in this video. I'm excited to continue reading, especially Stuart's Arthurian Saga and Rocchio's Sun Eater, but I don't have a whole lot more to say about these books at the moment. I've done reviews for most of them and will for most of the rest that I haven't done reviews for, because I'm currently writing reviews in September. Yeah, I'm currently writing reviews from September, and so I haven't written and filmed reviews for all of these books yet, but most of them are going to get reviews for sure. So if you want to know more about the thoughts, go look for the individual specific reviews. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. This is probably a longer video than I prefer them to be, but such is the way of things at times, especially when you go over a year without filming an update. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and have our social media linked in the description down below. We'll see you guys again soon. Stay well.